Imagine a winter night in the Norse lands, when the wind rolling in from the Norwegian sea lashes against the walls like an iron whip, and opening the door for just a few seconds lets a blade of cold slip straight into your spine. In this world, where winter isn't weather but a patient predator, the Viking longhouse becomes the final border between life and death. From the outside, it hardly looks impressive at all. Just a long mound of earth, a heavy turf roof buried under snow, blending into the frozen landscape like it naturally belongs there. But that humility is its camouflage. The less it stands out, the longer it survives. Beneath the layers of earth and timber lies a structure woven from ancestral memory. Wooden planks locked together without a single nail, every gap stuffed tightly with moss and clay, the outer shell wrapped in compressed turf so the wind has no point of attack. When the storm rises, the entire longhouse trembles like an old warrior leaning on his staff, yet it holds, trapping warmth from human breath, from the animals, from the slow-breathing ember bed at its heart. In the thick darkness, every whistle of wind slipping through the roof reminds them that a single mistake, one uninspected plank, one forgotten crack, could freeze the whole family before dawn. If you've ever wondered why Vikings treated their homes like living creatures, it's because every night they had to fight alongside them. And if this passage made you feel the chill of the north, let me know in the comments below. On a northern winter night, when the wind turns into invisible blades and the snow pounds the roof as if trying to pierce the whole world, the Viking roof becomes the very first battle line. At a glance, it's nothing more than layers of thatch, branches, and tightly packed turf lying still under the snow. But strangely, it breathes. Each layer traps warm air inside and pushes the cold outward, turning the roof into a living hide that shelters the entire family. Every autumn, men, women, and even children had to climb up and mend the roof, patching every crack, replacing every dead patch of grass. They knew that being even a single day late meant the winter wind would find a way in and carry a death sentence with it. But what surprises modern people most is the truth no one ever said outright. The roof, the one thing keeping them alive in a blizzard, was also the thing that could kill them the fastest. A small spark drifting up from the stone hearth, touching the dry thatch, and the whole roof would erupt in flames in just a few breaths. No time to shout, no time to run. Every soft crack above them was enough to make the whole family freeze in silence, listening to see whether it was shifting snow or death crawling across the roof. And here lies the real paradox, the thick black smoke from the hearth. The same smoke that burned their eyes and forced the children to breathe close to the floor, also coated the roof in a layer of soot, making it harder to ignite. Smoke, the thing that tormented them every day, was also their quiet protector. If that twist caught you off guard, share what you think. Were the Vikings more afraid of fire or of the cold? Inside every Viking longhouse, right where the stone hearth glowed like the rough, beating heart of the family, the strongest presence wasn't the fire. It was the smoke. With no chimney and no escape path, the smoke rose and pooled under the roof like a floating black cloud, forcing anyone who stepped inside to squint and shield their face. Children learned from the time they could crawl to breathe low, pulling thin pockets of air from just above the floor, while the adults grew so accustomed to it they could cook, work, and blink through a haze that stung like hot sand. But the strange truth is that the very thing that made them cough every day was also the invisible armor that kept the house alive through winter. As the smoke billowed upward, it seeped into every wooden gap and roof seam, coating them with a thick layer of black soot, olein. That layer sealed out the wind better than clay ever could, and it pushed the cold away from the dry grasses packed into the roof. Because of the smoke, the roof was harder to ignite, the walls were tighter against the wind, and the meat and fish hanging from the rafters dried naturally, stretching survival further when winter cut off every source of food. The smoke burned their eyes, scraped their throats, and clung to their clothes like a shadow. But no one complained. They knew that if even one day passed without smoke, the wind would find the old paths it once carved open, and the cold would pour in like a hunter returning to its trail. In the Viking world, pain wasn't always the enemy. Sometimes it was the reminder that you were still breathing. If you lived back then, how long do you think you could endure inside that smoke-filled home? When the long northern night dropped like a heavy curtain and the cold seeped through every grain of wood, the Vikings understood that sleep wasn't rest. It was another kind of battle. No one was allowed to sleep alone. Even a few steps of distance meant a body would cool faster than the fire could ever warm it back up. So the whole family, father, mother, children, even travelers, lay pressed together on a single floor of straw and animal skins, their breaths blending into a faint, warm mist. Dogs curled at their feet, young goats tucked themselves against human bodies, and children slept between two adults as if wrapped inside a living cocoon. The smell of fur, sweat, and wood smoke clung to every layer of bedding, creating an air so thick an outsider might feel suffocated. But to them, it was the scent of survival. Even a single shift in the night became a kind of instinctive signal. One person stirred, and the whole group would wake within seconds, like a single body sharing one reflex. In a land where the cold never slept, people had to learn to rest in a half-dreaming, half-alert state, keeping their ears open for the roof, for the wind, and for the breathing of the person beside them. And in that crowded space, they discovered the simplest truth. To make it through winter, every heart had to beat in the same rhythm. On those long northern nights, when every breath froze into mist and the fire curled in on itself against the cold, the Vikings knew their most dangerous enemy wasn't the wind howling outside. It was the ground beneath their backs. The earth wasn't cold in any normal sense. It was quiet, patient, like some ancient creature waiting for the moment you slipped up so it could steal the warmth out of your body. All it took was drifting a handspan off the bedding, letting a shoulder or half a calf touch the damp soil, and your body would start losing heat so fast you'd never stand up again. The Vikings called it the silent death, because the victim didn't scream, didn't fight. They simply drifted into a freezing sleep and never woke. To fight this heat thief, the longhouse floor became a fortress of layers: dry straw, thick moss like natural sponge, strips of hard bark, and finally animal hides rubbed with fat. Each layer placed with the care of an old ritual, passed down through generations. Under the dim red glow of the hearth, every straw fiber seemed to flicker. Every patch of moss breathed out a cool dampness, and the animal hides gleamed with a slick, oily shine, as if they were holding the family's very soul. Children were taught early to inspect the floor with their palms. Any spot that felt damp, cool, or made the faintest rustling sound meant the earth was finding a path to pull heat away. On the coldest nights, the whole family had to lift the flooring, replace the straw, add more moss, or slide in thin wooden planks, creating just enough distance to stay alive. Not everyone believed the earth had a will of its own, but hundreds of winters proved one thing. In the Viking world, the wind might make you shiver, but the ground was the killer that moved without a sound. If you lived back then, how many times do you think you'd check the floor before daring to lie down? Share your answer. When winter in the north sank so deep that your breath turned to frost even inside the house, the Vikings were forced to use a tactic they themselves considered dangerously cruel: hiding fire beneath the bed. Not a hearth, not an open pit, but clay bowls filled with glowing embers tucked directly under the wooden floor and layers of straw, right beneath the place where the entire family slept. Sleeping above live embers meant wagering every life in the room. A single cracked clay bowl, one spark popping loose, or even a slightly warped plank from dampness could send the whole longhouse up in flames like dry grass under a god's hammer. Stories were passed down about families jolting awake in total darkness at the sound of one tiny crack beneath the floor, their hearts pounding like they'd heard a warning from the fire god himself. And yet, despite the danger, they had no choice. Without the hidden heat, the cold would slide up through the floor like the breath of some ancient creature, draining the life out of a body in just a few hours. The smell of heated clay mixing with thin, wandering smoke hung in the air, like a whisper from something waiting for the first human mistake. And every night when the family lay down, they understood perfectly. Tonight, they would sleep on the back of the very thing that could save them, or burn them to ash in an instant. If you were the one lying there, would you dare to close your eyes, or would you stay awake to guard the fire that's guarding you? During the day, when the longhouse fire burned bright and fierce, the Vikings weren't just warming themselves. They were preparing the quietest, most loyal weapon for the coming night: hot stones. Large river stones were placed beside the hearth for hours until they clicked with tiny fractures, their surfaces so scorching that a single touch could blister skin. As the flames dimmed, mothers wrapped these small sons in animal hides and tucked them in among the children. Each stone a fragile thread, holding back the cold, waiting just beyond the door. At first, the heat pricked like needles, but moments later it spread into a dry, steady warmth, as if the stones were returning the memory of a long, buried summer. But the stones were only half the secret. The other half came from the animals, the allies no one ever named. Cattle pressed against the walls, their breath rising like warm mist. Goats curled at the family's feet, tiny bodies radiating a quiet, dependable heat. Dogs slept beside the children, offering warmth and a night-long alertness against any sound that didn't belong. Humans and animals, stones and breath, together they formed a living heat complex that no storm could easily break through. If you imagine a snow-heavy night, the Viking family lying among the smell of hides, the soft crack of hot stones, and the warm breath of cattle drifting in the dark. Tell me in the comments, do you feel more warmth in that scene, or more despair? When winter began grinding its teeth against every rooftop, the Vikings understood that protecting the home wasn't just daily work. It was a declaration of survival, almost a political ritual within each community. Whoever sealed their house best kept their family alive, kept their reputation intact, and sometimes even kept their voice in the village. Because in a world ruled by blizzards, power belonged to the one who knew how to keep death outside the door. From early autumn, the whole community gathered as if stepping into a strategic meeting. Men digging out wet clay and kneading it with frozen hands. Women packing green moss into every tiny gap as if patching battle armor. Children hauling dried dung from the pens, something outsiders saw as filthy, but the Vikings treated as war material. Every push into a wooden seam was a warning shot aimed at the wind. You will not pass through me. The wisest families even piled fresh snow against the walls, turning the enemy into an ally, building a frozen rampart only they understood how to use. The chieftain would walk from house to house, not just to ensure safety, but to see who had discipline, who had a strong defensive mind, and who might become the weak link in the coming winter. Once every crack was sealed with clay, moss, dried dung, and packed snow, the longhouse became an unofficial fortress. Outside, the wind screamed as if trying to tear the world apart. Inside, the warmth gathered like a vow, because in the long northern nights, no one survived by luck. They survived by defending their home the right way. If you were the chieftain back then, which would you inspect first, the walls or the roof? Share your answer below. There's a truth modern people can hardly grasp. On those winter nights, so long time itself seemed to stop, when smoke stung the eyes, when skin cracked from the cold, and even the hot stones could no longer hold their heat. The only thing that never died inside a Viking longhouse was faith. Not the grand, radiant kind, and not the loud, ceremonial kind, but an invisible flame they kept alive, with stories, songs, and ancestral memories, so their spirit wouldn't shatter. A soft hook, because in the north, the body might collapse under the cold, but the will was never allowed to. When the darkness grew so deep, the roofline vanished. The whole family gathered around the stone hearth. Children leaned into fur blankets, adults bent close to the fire, and the elders lifted their faces toward the darkness where they believed their ancestors were listening. A whispered prayer could help the weakest hold on. A trembling song drifting through smoke could keep a child from letting fear swallow their breath. A story about winters their forebears survived reminded everyone they were never alone. Outside, the wind shrieked as if trying to tear the world apart. Inside, shadows swayed across the earthen walls, moving with the fire's rhythm and with the rhythm of their belief. The Vikings understood that winter didn't only try to kill the body, it tried to break the soul first. And whoever lost their spirit first lost their life first. That's the final lesson left behind. In every winter of a human life, what keeps us standing isn't strength, it's what we believe in. If you felt the weight of that invisible flame, leave a comment and subscribe, because the journey through the Viking world still has many secrets waiting to be told.